This is the new 2023 Porsche 911 Carrera T, and it's a high-performance 911 without the cost of a typical high-performance 911. Some say the Porsche 911 has aged into sort of a luxury grand touring car over the years, but think of this as more of the purist sports car 911. And today I'm going to review the 911 Carrera T and show you all of its quirks and features. Before I get started, be sure to check out Cars and Bids, which is my enthusiast car auction website for cool cars from the modern era with free listings. You can list your cool car for free and auction it on Cars and Bids. And we've had some fantastic sales recently, including this Porsche Cayman GT4, which sold for $131,000, this gorgeous Lotus Esprit V8, which sold for just over $70,000, and this fantastic Porsche 911 Turbo, which brought just over $67,000. If you're looking to buy or sell a cool enthusiast car from the modern era, the 1980s and up, Cars and Bids is the place to do it. With daily auctions and great selection, check it out at carsandbids.com. All right, time for the quirks and features of the new Carrera T. And let's start with a little overview of exactly what this car is. Think of this as a base model 911, except with a specific focus on performance. Porsche revived the Carrera T name from the 60s and 70s a few years ago, presumably to kind of counteract some criticism that the base model 911s had gotten too soft, too luxury focused, too touring car, and not performance-y enough. And probably to help bring a performance model to Porsche enthusiasts who weren't necessarily willing or able to pay up for a GT3, which has gotten increasingly expensive over the years. So this is like a performance model at the lower end of the 911 lineup. Now, under the hood, or under this piece of bodywork that can't be removed so you can't actually access the engine, but back here somewhere, this car has the exact same engine as a regular 911 Carrera, which is a 3-liter turbo flat 6. It makes about 380 horsepower and about 330 pound-feet of torque. So what exactly is the difference between the Carrera T and the standard Carrera? It's primarily in equipment, namely the Carrera T gets all the good stuff. For example, the Carrera T comes standard with a manual transmission, Porsche's 7-speed manual, as opposed to the PDK that's standard on the regular Carrera. Carrera T also comes standard with rear seat delete, no rear seats, whereas the standard Carrera comes with back seats like a luxury car might have. Carrera T also has a lighter battery than the standard 911 and thinner glass all around, and the result is Porsche says the Carrera T is about 100 pounds lighter than a standard 911 Carrera as well, which obviously should impact performance. And the Carrera T has a lot of other desirable performance equipment upgrades as well. For instance, a mechanical limited slip differential with Porsche torque vectoring. Both of those features are really desirable performance car. Porsche torque vectoring is the feature that will break the inside wheel in a corner to help push the car through the corner faster. And a limited slip differential is obviously beneficial. Those are standard in the Carrera T. They're not even available in the base 911 Carrera, although they are standard on the Carrera S. This car also has Porsche's active suspension management system, PASM they calls it, which allows you to adjust the suspension. This is standard on the Carrera S, and again, not available on the base Carrera, but it's standard in the Carrera T. Also standard on the Carrera T is Porsche's Sport Chrono package, which is optional on most other 911 models, but it's standard here. And rear axle steering is available on the Carrera T, which is another nice feature to have. Standard Carrera doesn't even offer it. It's optional on the Carrera S as well, and it's optional on the Carrera T. And beyond that, the Carrera T also has some other nice upgrades to the standard 911. For instance, this car comes standard with sport exhaust. That's not really a performance upgrade, but it is cool, and it's something you'd want on the performance model, and so this gets it. The Carrera T also offers sport bucket seats, Porsche's carbon fiber backed one-piece hardcore sport bucket seats. You can get them, and they're in this car, as you can see. These seats are great for racetrack use. They're not the most comfortable, but they are serious performance seats, and they're expensive. $5,900 extra for these sport bucket seats. But if you're hardcore getting your performance Carrera T, sport bucket seats are available. And another nice upgrade, this car comes standard with larger wheels than a regular Carrera, 21-inch wheels in back and 20-inch wheels in front, which is the wheel size from the Carrera S. So another upgrade over the standard Carrera. So since I mentioned the cost of these sport bucket seats, let's talk pricing. The standard Carrera starts around $108,000. The Carrera S starts around $125,000, and this model, the Carrera T, is in between them with a starting price of around $119,000. Now, as for options, I mentioned a 7-speed manual is standard in this car, but you can add a PDK automatic if you prefer as a free option. I also mentioned that rear seat delete is standard in this car, but if you want the rear seats, you can add them back again as a free option. The car is a little bit faster, 0 to 60 with PDK. Porsche says high 3-second range with PDK, low 4-second range with the manual, but obviously it's going to be a little bit heavier if you put those rear seats back in. But don't go thinking this car is all about free options, because I hold here the equipment list and it's not cheap. And it's worth pointing out that I think this particular Carrera T is almost perfectly equipped. It has all of the performance goodies that the driving purist should want, but some of them are expensive. For example, rear axle steering, which I mentioned earlier, that costs $2,100 extra. This car has it, but it's a big price tag. The steering wheel is finished in Alcantara, which Porsche actually calls race tex. A lot of people say they don't like this because it looks bad as it ages, but when you're buying this car new, it's nice to have, especially on hot days. Your hands get sweaty, it's still easy to grip the wheel as opposed to a leather wheel. Anyway, that race tex wheel is $200 extra. Not that bad, but here's an expensive one, the carbon fiber roof, which obviously lowers the weight at the top of the car. Great to have, lowers the center of gravity, nice option. It's $3,900 extra, big spend for a little benefit. The only option in this car's option list that I wouldn't bother with is the Carrera T interior package, which adds, I guess, a little extra leather upholstery, leather trim to the door panels, the dashboard, and it adds gray stitching, which is so subtle that you barely even notice it. That costs an extra $7,000, $6,930 extra for a little bit of leather and a little bit of stitching. And frankly, you just shouldn't bother. This should be the car for the Porsche driving purist. Leave the stitching and the leather to the new money Porsche owner. Today is Porsche crop who wears their Rolex on the outside of their shirt cuff so they can brag to everybody how rich they are. This is the car for people who like to drive. You don't need to spend $7 grand for that interior package. But anyway, add up the total price of this car and it comes to $151,000 or $144,000 without the interior package. That's a lot of money. I mentioned this is like the performance 911 on a budget compared to a GT3, but this car is still really expensive. However, it's nowhere near as expensive as a GT3. Those start around $162,000. Most of them are equipped to the $185,000, $195,000 range, and then you get the dealer markups. I think most GT3s are leaving the dealer with a $250,000 price tag, and so that's a lot of money. And so this car is the budget alternative, even though it's not exactly budget friendly. So anyway, that's an overview of the new 911 Carrera T. Now, I have reviewed many different versions of the new 992 Porsche 911 and shown you all of the quirks and features. I'm not going to go through everything here, but I am going to hit a few highlights to refresh your memory before I get this car on the road. One cool thing I like on the steering wheel, you have this little dial for the drive mode. Very easy to reach, easy to adjust the drive mode instead of some switch in the center console you got to find. It's right there and you can go through your drive modes there. I also like on the steering wheel, you have this little wheel that adjusts the screen to the right of the tachometer in the center. You can use this to show whatever you want to see on that screen, including a large map that'll show you where you are. Nice to have that level of configurability. Even with the old school fixed physical tach in the center, you still can change what's on the screen. It's also worth pointing out this steering wheel, Porsche finally added a next track button. Over on the left side, you can press it and go on to the next track. This was a big complaint of a lot of prior Porsche steering wheels that they didn't have one, but they listened to me and presumably a lot of their customers, and they put one on the wheel so you can change the track easily without reaching over and figuring out how to do it with the screen. Also worth pointing out, one other interesting quirk in this car is the cup holder here in the center, which looks like a fairly standard cup holder, but it has this little tab at the top. You press that and you can remove it. And Porsche also offers an ashtray that can go in this spot, and you can swap them out depending on whether you want a cup holder or an ashtray. It's kind of strange to have that removable feature there, but it is there, and you can choose what's going in your center console. Now, in the driver's door sill, you can see two switches, one that looks like it opens the front compartment, and the other that looks like it opens the back compartment. So we pull to open the back compartment, and this is what we find. Again, this is not an engine cover back here, and I still think it's a travesty that you cannot access the engine yourself on a Porsche 911. It doesn't seem like it makes sense, but that's what we're faced with. But if you open up this cover, it's like a flap, and you can access some cooling fans and the spots where you can put in engine oil and engine coolant in back, although no engine itself. Now, as for the flap itself, this flap has an interesting Easter egg in 992 models. It has 9 little vertical lines on the left side, 9 little vertical lines on the right side, and then 2 in the middle serving as the third brake light for 992, or at least Porsche says that's why they did it. Kind of a cool little hidden Easter egg. As for the front compartment, well, it's big. Just like other 911 models, this car is reasonably practical, unless of course you deleted the rear seats, but you can fit in pretty good storage, luggage, whatever you want up there, so you can use this as a relative daily driver, even though it's a purist performance car. All right, driving the new 911 Carrera T, and I have to say, I've had this car for a couple days, been driving it around, and I am tremendously impressed. I have not been the greatest advocate for the newest 911. In fact, the newest 911s, I kind of feel like this car is getting so bloated and so large and so luxury and so touring car and so old man. It just doesn't seem like the fun, exciting performance car that it was when I was a kid. But this car really brings it back in some cool ways. For one thing, it's just focused on driving. So many Porsches now are focused on the spec. Nice spec. But your spec is so good. You get spec. What about driving? What about driving the car? This car is focused on driving. It's actually just a driver's car, and I love that. And what I mean is lighter weight than a standard 911, a little bit, but some. Manual transmission, rear seat delete, carbon buckets, rear axle steering, PASM, PTV, limited slip, bigger wheels. This car, sport exhaust, this car has like all the good stuff, which is awesome. And a GT3 is now so stupidly expensive that it's just become kind of a flex for rich people who think they're hardcore driving a GT3. This car, I think, is more for people who actually want to drive. Now, the funny thing about it is when you tell people a Carrera T, well, it's based on a base Carrera. Oh, a base Carrera, that's nothing. It's funny, when I was younger, a Boxster was the nothing car, and any 911 was cool. Then it became you had to have an S and to be cool, and now it's you have to have a GT car to be cool. Well, base Carrera's got 390 horsepower. This car does 0 to 60 in 4 seconds. It still feels fast, it still feels fun, but it's not so fast like a Turbo S that you can't do anything with it. You can go through the gears, you can downshift, you can ring out a couple gears, and you can actually enjoy and have fun with this car, and yet it's still faster than 99% of the vehicles you're going to encounter on the road. I have become really cynical about Porsches over the last few years, and I mention it in almost every podcast interview that I do. All the Porsche people with their stitching enthusiasts, I call them, with their Porsches and their watches, and they just care about how things look and not how things drive. Well, this is the Porsche if you care about how things drive. It just sticks to a line. You know, it's funny, I drove 992S, and my thought the whole time was, this is too big, this is too luxurious, it's just not fun. It's amazing to me that this car is the same as that car. I mean, in terms of sizing and everything, and yet it feels so much more alive. If there are people out there who, like me, have become a little bit cynical about Porsche and about what the brand means in 2022, this car should change your mind. No, it is not as fast or as exciting as a GT3. And for the few people out there who are still buying a GT3 for the actual purpose, driving, they will say, look at this and say, it's not enough for me. But I think if you're like a Porsche purist driving enthusiast and you want the best driving 911, it's very difficult to argue that this isn't that. Yes, it's not as fast as some of the others, but it's fun and it's exciting. Now, the drawback of this car, all of this said, is that no one will actually equip it the way that this car is equipped. Everyone who gets one of these is gonna get a PDK, and normal seats, and they're gonna put the rear seats back in, and they're not gonna do the carbon roof. This car is perfect. This specific Carrera T is perfect. But I fear that a lot of Carrera Ts are gonna end up kind of spec'd boringly and then won't really have any advantages over a base Carrera. But if you're gonna buy a 911 for the actual purpose of enjoyment, not for parking it in your garage and looking at it, not for getting a nice spec and taking it to the Porsche spec meets and showing off your stitching, for actually driving the car, this is awesome. It's just a ton of fun. It's fun to throw around. It's fun to go through the gears. It feels like how I used to feel as a kid, 17 years old, working at the Ferrari dealership. We had a used 993 and a used 996 on the lot, and they were so much fun to drive. And I feel like that again in this car for the first time in a new 911 that's not a GT3 in a long time. This car really brings back the feel and the fun, the passion, the driving passion of what this brand used to be about. And so that's the 2023 Porsche 911 Carrera T. If you're looking for pure Porsche driving fun without spending 911 Turbo or GT3 money, this car delivers. It fits into a neat spot in the 911 lineup where it's aimed at the Porsche driving purist who cares more about getting behind the wheel and having fun than bragging about his deviated stitching colors. Anyway, now it's time to give the Carrera T a Doug score. And the Doug score is here, 66 out of 100, which places the Carrera T here against similar vehicles. It loses out to the new Carrera S, which beats out the T for equipment and practicality since the T loses those back seats. And the C2S is also a little faster, but for pure driving enjoyment, I actually want the two cars at the bottom of this list, the Cayman GT4 and the Carrera T. Those are the Porsches I love, even if all the more expensive stuff looks better on paper.